Hello, I'm Josh, and welcome to the second of the Daily Clicks developer interviews. Would you like to please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Lucas, and I make video games.
Could you tell us a little bit more about who you are? So, what is a typical week in your life like, if there is such a thing?
The typical week of my life right now is that there's a very untypical week of my life. I've just moved to a brand new country. It's quite scary, but I was still in between. I was still waiting for school to start again. I've just been working on video games to keep my mind occupied in this strange and foreign new place.
Is there anything more you want to say, kind of like where you are now, or do you not really want to go into that kind of personal details?
Be fine. So basically, I was born in Sweden, but I've lived most of my life outside in the what's called an Arab world, in Egypt, in Qatar, in the UAE, and what's in that time. Even though the game dev communities are like pretty small, I have still managed to find them, and it's just been such a wonderful with these like in um in the UAE, for example, there's a very small but there's a very passionate game dev community, and like because it's so small compared to other countries, there's a sort of real sense of community there because everybody literally knows everybody else. So it's a so moving here to what's called Sweden, where I am now, to a much bigger and much more still developed game development industry is quite a difference.
And do you find that as well, being connected into the kind of an international kind of game dev community as well, kind of online?
Well, definitely. The what's called Arab world is generally quite international because there are people from Europe, from what's called Southeast Asia, from Eastern Asia, just come over here to live and work. So I already, a lot of my what's called the friends who I grew up with are very, very international. But what's called now even more with the power of the internet, game dev truly is international. During the pandemic, so when I was stuck at home, I started, at the recommendation of friends, I started joining what's called game developer meetups in Washington at the Washington IGDA, and I've been what's called made some very lovely what's called friends, and I've been going there ever since, which is just amazing that I can, from the other side of the world, participate in a community of people who I have never met, but they're all so nice.
I had a kind of similar kind of feeling when I got into game development back when the Games Factory was the kind of the big thing, and Multimedia Fusion was the kind of new kid on the block. I was part of online communities where a lot of the people were Americans. I did a lot of kind of staying up late to kind of chat with American friends. And
Stayed up to 2 a.m. too many times.
yeah, and that was fun, kind of being part of the entire community. But then it was also really nice when I went to one of the Click conventions that they had in the UK to be able to actually meet up with loads of other developers who I'd seen online.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people who I'd seen online I'd never met in person. It's definitely great when people can, from different countries, have that in common, that love for creating games. Yeah, it's good to be around some communities that kind of share that passion. So, in terms of creating video games, how did you get into making video games and to using ClickTeam's tools?
There was this introductory class when I was, I think, 11 or something in my school, and I was using a software called Scratch. And I thought it was really fun, but I wanted something just a tiny bit more. So I was afraid to, go to something like very, very programming heavy because for me, programming was just like magic wizardry, which very, very smart people could only do. So I found a little software called Click Infusion after watching I think it was watching a Two Clicks Philip video that
Mhm.
he went through the software and he talked about the features and it looked very interesting. So I decided to pick it up.
Excellent. Yeah, I have seen the two clicks Philip videos. They're very good. So, could you tell us a little bit more about why it is you kind of wanted to make your own games?
Back in the good old days in the 90s and the also 80s, the thing little kids dreamed of was to be like a rock star because that was the big thing. That was the frontier of media. Nowadays, it's video games, which I think is like the single biggest reason myself and some other younger people get into video games just because cool and everybody plays them. So you might as well have a crack at making one. But on a more intellectual level, as I've gotten older, the reason why I really stuck with video games instead of like working on creative writing or some other things which I do is because video games as a medium represent every single other form of established medium combined, made interactive, and made portable through computers. How does that not just sound absolutely awesome?
So you get the best of everything all coming together.
You have the music, you have the
Mhm.
art, you have the graphics, you have everything made interactive and made infinitely portable.
And do you ever find it kind of daunting that it then means you effectively have to be really good at every single thing kind of to make a game?
Definitely, especially as a solo game developer.
Yeah. So is there any specific aspect of it that you kind of feel like that's where you shine?
I like a lot of it, but the things that I like the most is probably the writing and the overarching, like the high concept and narrative design. Not the like. I'm not calling myself, oh, I'm the ideas guy, but it's more of like a how do the nitty gritty of the mechanics like help the overarching message of the story. The way I sort of make games is I do it kind of like not exactly the way you should do it. When I design games, I put meaning above function. So when I make a game, I think, okay, what do I want this game to say, or what am I trying to get across here? And then I pick mechanics that try to fit that message.
I mean, if it is something that works for you, then that is for you, that is the right way.
It's not entirely wrong, but it doesn't. It lends itself more to interactive movies than anything else.
It creates its own challenges doing it that way.
Definitely.
So when you kind of need support when you're making games, who do you turn to?
Support it probably like we talked about the sport. Lovely, what's called the local and what's called and the international, what's called the game developer communities. But more often than not, I found that I can turn to a lot of my non-game dev friends for support, even though they well, don't know much about game dev. They're just you'd be surprised how much the average person thinks that video game development is very interesting, and they're happy to explore to help me when I ask them, oh, can you give me some feedback on this and that? And just normal friends give you a tremendous amount of support in game dev.
Glad to hear you're getting support. So have you released any games yet?
No, that comes to the exciting bit. I've released a bunch of tiny game jam prototypes, but I am releasing my first fully fleshed out game, Zorpon, in sometime fall this year, with a closed beta coming out on July the 20th.
Excellent. And hopefully that will be published on the Daily Click. And where are you kind of publishing it? How are you kind of planning to get it out there into the world?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? It's Zorpon is going to be well, not freeware, but it's going to be published for free forever. So it's not a commercial endeavor. It's mostly just a me proving to myself that I can make an actual game. It's going to be published on itch, and hopefully with and of course with a daily click and maybe a game jolt because people have their own preferences. And if enough kind people donate to me on itch, I might put it up on Steam, but I don't think that's very likely.
What's the barriers to put it up on Steam?
Just honestly, more the 100 the worth of the $100. It's not that I don't want to or it's not like oh no I'll starve to death if I spend $100. I just don't see much point of putting it on Steam when I'm not going to sell it for anything. It's going to be free forever, so might as
Yeah.
well put up on more a platform like itch, which is more friendly to that kind of stuff.
So that means that it's really useful that there are these other platforms that people can use where there is lower barriers of entry, where you don't have to actually pay to give something away for free.
Definitely. On the other hand, the 90% of the people who use itch are developers, so
Yes, I mean that's very similar to the Daily Click, where a lot of people who play Daily Click games are fellow game
definitely.
developers as well. I know a lot of people who visit Daily Click are either people who currently make games or people who used to make games but don't have time at the moment. So, in terms of Zorpon, rather than asking what kind of game it is, I'd like to ask you what kind of game isn't it?
Well, Zorpon isn't it isn't one game to begin with. Zorpon is made up of many other different smaller games. Moreover, Zorpon In very many senses, very traditional, as in you have what's called. So in Zorpon, you do not know what Zorpon is. You must discover Zorpon. By truly understanding Zorpon, you will surely what's will be on the path of enlightenment. But what Zorpon isn't is exactly straightforward. More than a traditional game. It's a bit of a it's a bit of a meta game puzzle. So you have these smaller games, and you have this overarching high concept of what Zorpon is. So you're sort of divided between playing the smaller games and then this overarching what's called meta game, which is something which I think is quite interesting. Of all my games, I try to, if at the very least, not make something new, try to make something in a different game. I don't think any new concept exists ever. Ideas aren't just, they don't come out of nothing. They're based on ideas before them. But at the very least, I think Zorpon is something very, very quite different from a normal video game, and I am quite proud of that.
So I suppose if it isn't a new idea, it is at least a new expression.
Yes, it's at least something new. It's something which a lot of my friends have cautioned me is maybe a bit too new, but rather too new than too not new.
And if Zorpon were a feeling, what kind of feeling would it be?
Well, Zorpon is all feelings combined, but existential dread.
Would that be its motto? If it had a motto?
Well, Zorpon is a game of hope, but it isn't. I really don't want to spoil what Zorpon actually is. The person I made the music with didn't find out what Zorpon was until 6 months development, so you'll have to play the game for yourself. But Zorpon is material and not material. It irreparably divides all peoples, and it is, let's see, and it's Zorpon. It's that simple,
Zorpon is Zorpon. Excellent.
and so much more, and nothing at all.
Okay. And are there any important lessons that you learned while developing Zorpon? I know you're kind of still developing it, but kind of so far.
So far, I definitely marketed too late. I gave myself 1 month marketing time to, get to going. Oh, 1 month, that'll be enough. But 1 month in, it's very hard to get people to notice your game. It's very hard to. I didn't even have a Twitter before I started making Zorpon, but apparently that's where you're supposed to be. So it's very hard. So you really should. Traditionally with games, you take how long you think it will take, and then add 50% onto it. Same goes 100% for marketing. It takes more time than you actually think it does. Scheduling, honestly, is the biggest downfall of most game developers. Game development takes so much more time than you think you is, and it's going to be so much more messy. Any idea in your head is absolutely perfect, but once you try to shove it into this ugly, disgusting, completely uncaring world, it turns horrible. But just practical advice out of game developers, for game developers rather, when you get a chance, try to integrate the story and the mechanics in whatever interesting ways possible. Normally in games, you have the cutscenes, you have the story, you have the background, then you go to the mechanics. They're two different worlds. But what I try to do with Zorpon, which I think I did a pretty good job at, is really combining the two. The narrative supports the mechanics, and the mechanics support the narrative, and together they tell an overarching story. It's like how in cinema, the cinematography combines with the script to create a overarching story. So if you have like a Dutch angle and then you have characters freaking out, it gives a overarching sense of dread. But absolutely the same goes with video games, with the story and the mechanics.
In terms of inspirations, are there any kind of video games or other media which have really kind of inspired you in your game development?
For media, it'd be the Mitchell and Webb show. Those guys are amazing, and they have a lot of absurdist humor, which I've been inspired for what's called Zorpon. Beyond that, Zorpon is in many ways a sort of one-to-one translation of the books and the essays of Albert Camus. So the most heavy inspiration definitely comes from him.
And I suppose the last question is whether there's anything more that you'd like to say to our audience.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for watching very much. I watched the What's Another and you like this. They're great, and I hope you keep making them. Second of all, play Zorpon. It'll be good, I promise. Shameless plugs aside, make that game you always wanted to make because no one else is going to do it for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.